every tree on the other side of the fence. I want my lake view back.
That's what the HOA president screamed at a tree crew, while my brother Travis and I were 200 miles south at a forestry conference. By the time we got home Sunday evening, 30 mature firs and maples on my mother's old farm had been turned into stumps that smelled like fresh sap and chainsaw oil. Travis stepped out of the truck and just stood there, holding the small carved goat our mother had given him for his birthday in 1998. Behind those stumps used to be a wall of Douglas firs my mother planted by hand in 1962 to bring the land back after a bad clear-cut. The HOA president stood at her property line in linen pants, arms crossed, telling me she had fixed the view problem. She didn't know I had spent 30 years as a city arborist, and 12 of those trees were registered with the County Heritage Tree Program. So I didn't yell. I drove to the courthouse the next morning. Where are you watching from, and what would you have done? My name is Tate Brannigan, and I have spent most of my adult life climbing trees. 30 years as a municipal arborist for the city of Bellingham, Washington, with a saddle, a chainsaw, and the patience to read a tree the way some people read a paperback. I know the smell of fresh-cut cedar, the sound a hollow oak makes when you tap it, and the way a Douglas fir sways in a wind it doesn't trust. Trees were my career. After my mother died, they became something more. My mother's name was Helen Brannigan. She bought 28 acres on the south end of Lake Kavanaugh in Skagit County in 1961. The land had been logged hard in the 40s, stumps the size of dining tables, washed-out drainage, no shade for a mile. Helen got a small Forest Service replanting grant in 1962 and put 800 Douglas fir saplings in the ground over 3 summers, mostly by herself. By the time my brother Travis and I were old enough to walk the property, the saplings were tall enough to whistle in. By the time my mother passed 18 months ago, they were 130 feet tall, with bark like rough armor and crowns that filtered the morning light into gold dust. Travis is my younger brother. He has Down syndrome, and he is the gentlest person I have ever known. After Mom passed, I left my city job and moved up to the farm full-time so he and I could stay together. I bought a small herd of dairy goats that summer because Travis loved goats more than any other living thing on earth, and because the pasture below the firs was too good to waste. We started with 4. By that fall, we had 11. Up the hill from us, on the prime lakefront ridge, sat the gates of Heron Bluff Estates. 47 custom homes, an entry fountain, a community dock, and a private security guard who waved at FedEx trucks like he was issuing visas. The president of the HOA was a woman named Marlene Voss, 51 years old, blonde hair pulled back in a severe knot, blocky build under linen blazers and yoga pants, the kind of woman who carries a clipboard the way other people carry a small dog. Her husband, Reginald, sat on the county zoning board, which she mentioned at every neighborhood meeting, whether anyone asked or not. Marlene had been writing me letters about my trees since the day I moved in. The first letter said the firs were blocking premium lake views and asked, politely, if I would consider topping them. I declined politely. The second letter referenced a view easement she claimed had been recorded with her purchase. I had pulled the title chain on her property myself the previous winter. There was no easement. The third letter included a hand-drawn view corridor proposal, showing exactly where my trees would be cut. The fourth letter was a printed timber estimate from a tree service. The fifth letter was a photograph of Travis feeding our goats with a caption that read, "Property values are protected by community standards." That last one I kept in a folder, just in case. In November of last year, I started registering my mother's mature trees with the Skagit County Heritage Tree Program. By the time of this story, I had registered 12. I had also enrolled the entire 28 acres in a federal climate-smart commodities carbon credit program. 3,200 metric tons of stored carbon, contracted over 25 years, with annual stewardship payments and a registered Forest Service inventory. I never told Marlene. I never told anyone. The paperwork was on file, and that was where it belonged. That spring, I drove south to a forestry conference in Portland, with Travis booked into respite care for the weekend at a sanctuary in Mount Vernon. We were gone 48 hours. By the time we got back, my mother's forest was gone. I drove up the gravel road at 6 on Sunday evening, with Travis sleeping in the passenger seat. The light was falling sideways through where the trees should have been, And that was the first thing I noticed. Too much light, too far in. Light cutting all the way to the goat pen, which had spent the last 60 years in deep, cool shadow. I slowed the truck. Then I saw the stumps. 30 of them. Cut clean and low, sap weeping, sawdust still pale on top. 300 years of standing wood, reduced to circles the size of tractor tires. The big leaf maples by the spring were down. The 2 old-growth cedars at the property corner were down. The fir wall my mother had planted by hand was down. The silence was the kind of silence you get when the wind has nothing left to move through. Travis woke up. He sat forward, put his hand on the dashboard, and said, very quietly, "Where did the friends go?" I couldn't answer him. I parked the truck in the drive and helped him down. He walked over to the nearest stump and crouched, and put his palm flat against the cut surface. He kept it there for almost a minute. Then he started crying without making a sound. I knelt beside him. I told him the trees were sleeping. It wasn't true, and he knew it. He was 39 years old, and he had walked this property barefoot since he could walk at all. He knew exactly what had happened. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line at 6:25. I called my old colleague Rosalind Krause at 6:40. By 8, I had follow-up appointments scheduled. I made Travis a grilled cheese. I sat with him on the porch until he stopped shaking. I tucked him into bed at 9:30, with the carved wooden goat under his hand. Then I walked the property with a flashlight and counted 30 stumps. Monday morning, I drove up to the gates of Heron Bluff Estates. The guard recognized me and waved me through. I parked at the cul-de-sac in front of Marlene Voss's house, a 4,000-square-foot timber frame contemporary with a wall of windows facing the lake. She was in her driveway loading a yoga bag into the back of a Pearl Range Rover. She saw me coming and didn't bother to look surprised. "Tate," she said, "I was going to call you this week. We finally got the view problem sorted out." I stopped about 8 feet from her. I made my hands stay loose at my sides. "Marlene, I want you to tell me, on your own porch, that you ordered a crew to cut 30 trees off my property while I was out of town." She tilted her head. "Tate, those trees were a hazard. The board has been dealing with member complaints for years. We retained a tree service to handle the view corridor. Send me the invoice, and the HOA will reimburse for any landscaping costs. You did this on land you do not own. We have view rights. It's been understood by every property owner up here for years. If you want to make this a thing, fine. But the work is done. The view is back. Honestly, Tate, you should be thanking me." "Marlene," I kept my voice low, "did you pay the crew in cash?" For half a second her face did something. Then the smile came back. "Tate, I'm not going to discuss internal HOA contracting decisions with someone who isn't a member. If you have a billing question, you can submit it through the proper channels." She climbed into the Range Rover. She closed the door. She backed out without looking at me. I stood in her driveway for another 20 seconds. Then I drove down the hill, past the stumps, past the goats grazing in too much sun, and straight to the Skagit County Sheriff's substation in Mount Vernon. Deputy Penelope Ortega met me at the front desk. I told her what had happened. She drove out to the farm with me at noon and walked the stump line with a measuring tape and a department camera. She photographed each one. She measured the diameter at the cut surface. She wrote the number on a small evidence flag and pressed it into the bare dirt next to each stump. When she got to the cedars, she stopped. She looked at me. "Tate," she said, "this is a felony." I nodded. I had known since the moment I saw the light. Deputy Ortega filed the report Monday afternoon. She tagged it as Class C felony timber trespass under Washington Revised Code 64.12.030 and forwarded it to the prosecutor's office in Mount Vernon by the end of the day. By Tuesday morning, the file was on the desk of an assistant district attorney named Brett Whitcomb. By Tuesday afternoon, the file had quietly disappeared. I learned this when Ortega called me Wednesday morning, her voice clipped and angry. The case had been redirected to the county civil division as a property dispute. Whitcomb's office had received a call from a senior partner at a Seattle firm representing Marlene Voss. They had also received, separately, a call from Reginald Voss's office over at the zoning board. 2 calls before lunch on a Tuesday. The case was off the felony track inside 36 hours. I asked Ortega if there was anything she could do. She paused. Then she said, "Tate, I'm a deputy. I file reports. I don't write the prosecutor's calendar, but I will tell you something off the record. The crew that did the cutting was Western Slope Tree LLC. The foreman is a man named Hugh Pelham. He's on his second DUI and one citation away from losing his contractor's license. If your attorney calls him directly, he might be useful." I thanked her. I called my attorney that afternoon. My attorney was Linnea Halverson, late 40s, environmental law specialty, 12 years at the EPA before she went into private practice in Bellingham. She had handled a dozen timber trespass cases in Skagit and Whatcom counties. She drove out to the farm on Wednesday evening with a yellow legal pad, a stack of state forestry pamphlets, and a thermos of black coffee. We sat at my kitchen table while the light faded over the empty ridge. She read the deputy's report. She read my heritage tree registrations. She read my carbon credit enrollment package. She set everything down and looked at me. "Tate," she said, "do you understand what you're sitting on?" I told her I had a rough idea. "You have a rough idea, but not the full picture yet. I need you to give me 48 hours to talk to a federal contact and confirm one thing. Can you not file anything publicly until I get back to you?" I agreed. While Linnea worked her angles, Marlene worked hers. By Thursday, an envelope arrived at my front door from a Seattle law firm. Inside was a settlement offer, $575 per tree, totaling $17,250, in exchange for a full release of all claims and an agreement not to disparage the HOA or its president in any forum, online or otherwise. The letter ended with the sentence, "We trust this generous offer fully resolves this regrettable misunderstanding." I sat at my kitchen table and read the offer twice. $575 for a firm my mother had planted with a borrowed shovel in 1963. I didn't reply that day. I drove out to the back 40 with Travis instead. He brought his sketchbook. I helped him count goats. He drew a picture of one of the stumps with a small bird sitting on it. Underneath the picture he wrote, in careful block letters, "Friend." I told him I would frame it. Friday morning I called Marlene's lawyer and declined the offer in writing. By Friday afternoon, Marlene had escalated. The local weekly paper, the Skagit Beacon, ran a small story on page 7 titled, "Lake Kavanaugh Property Owners Reach View Resolution." The article quoted Marlene 3 times. It quoted a private appraiser named Bryce Tinney, who claimed the trees on my land had been compromised by root rot and bark beetle infestation, and would have come down within 5 years on their own. There was a photograph of one stump cropped tight enough that you couldn't see the perfectly healthy sapwood and tight rings of a 120-year-old fir. I called Linnea. She had already seen the article. She read me the appraiser's name back and laughed once, the way someone laughs at a bad joke at a funeral. "Bryce Tinney is not a certified arborist," she said. "He's a real estate appraiser with an online tree risk certificate from 2019. He's testified for HOAs in 2 prior cases. Both times, on cross-examination, he admitted he doesn't own a coring tool." She paused. "Tate, I have my federal answer. We need to meet tomorrow." Linnea drove back out Saturday morning with a thick manila folder. She set it on the kitchen table and slid me 3 documents on top. The first was a printout from the U.S. Forest Service Climate Smart Commodities portal, showing my carbon credit contract, signed in March 2024, 25 years, 3,200 metric tons of stored carbon. The second was a printout from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, showing my mother's 1989 designation of the property as a Class II riparian buffer zone for steelhead and bull trout, both ESA-listed threatened species. The third was a topographic map showing the spawning channel that ran through the western edge of my property. The trees Marlene had cut included the entire riparian buffer of that channel. "Tate," Linnea said, "this is no longer a local timber trespass case. It is now a Federal Endangered Species Act takings claim, a federal carbon contract breach, and a state heritage tree triple damages claim. Bundled together, the exposure on Marlene Voss is somewhere north of $500,000 and possibly federal criminal." I sat with that for a minute. Then I said, "What do we do?" "We do not file yet. We let her keep digging. She has already proven she escalates under pressure. If she escalates one more time on the public record, we have her by the throat. In the meantime, I am bringing in the Swinomish Tribal Fisheries Office. The spawning channel is part of their treaty co-management area. They have standing to file as a co-claimant, and their counsel will not be intimidated by a Seattle HOA firm. What about the appraiser? She smiled. I already filed a complaint with the Washington Department of Licensing. Bryce Tinney's appraisal credentials are under review. I called Rosalind Krause that evening. Rosalind was a forest pathologist I had worked with for 15 years at the city. She agreed to drive up Sunday with a coring tool, a stump radar unit, and her old USFS field notebook. We spent 6 hours on Sunday taking core samples from every stump on the property. By the time the sun set, Rosalind had data showing every single tree had been healthy. No root rot, no beetle infestation. Average age across the 30 stumps was 107 years. She also confirmed, quietly, that 2 of the cedars were closer to 240 years old. They had been alive when Lewis and Clark were still 10 years away from the Pacific. The next week, Marlene escalated exactly the way Linnea had predicted. She filed a complaint with the Washington Department of Natural Resources, alleging that I was operating an unpermitted livestock facility within a critical area, in violation of the county's Critical Areas Ordinance. She included photographs of my goats grazing near the spawning channel. The complaint demanded an emergency inspection. The DNR sent an inspector that Friday. Her name was Yvette Polson, 55 years old, 22 years in habitat enforcement. She walked the property with me for 90 minutes. She watched the goats from a distance. She measured fence setbacks. She tested water clarity in the spawning channel. She took photographs of the stump field and asked, mildly, what had happened there. I told her the truth. When we finished the walk-around, she sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and made notes for 10 minutes without speaking. Then she looked up and said, Mr. Brannigan, your goat operation is fully compliant with state regulations. I will be filing a clearance memo this afternoon. I will also be filing a separate report on the timber removal I observed today, because the buffer destruction along that spawning channel is independently reportable to my agency under the State Shoreline Management Act. She paused. One more thing. The complainant on this case left a voicemail with my office Wednesday, telling us where to look and what to find. I have the recording. It would be available to your attorney upon a subpoena. I called Linnea before Yvette had pulled out of the driveway. That night I sat with Travis on the porch and watched the goats wander where the firs used to stand. The stumps caught the last light like a row of small altars. Travis leaned his head on my shoulder. He said, Tate, are we going to plant new friends? I told him we were. I told him we were going to plant the kind of forest Mom would have wanted. And we were going to put goats and trees together. And we were going to give the new place her name. He smiled. He fell asleep on my shoulder 10 minutes later. I watched the sun go down behind a ridge that didn't have a fir wall anymore. And I felt the first piece of something that wasn't grief. The midpoint of the case turned not on what Marlene had cut, but on what she didn't know she had cut. Linnea brought a federal forester named Dean Whitaker out from the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest Office on a Tuesday morning. He carried a battered Forest Service map case and a tablet loaded with the Federal Carbon Registry. He spent the morning walking the stump field with Rosalind Krause. The two of them cross-referenced GPS coordinates on every stump against the carbon credit enrollment file from March 2024. By 11 o'clock, Whitaker was sitting on my porch steps shaking his head. Mr. Brannigan, he said, you enrolled 28 acres last March. Your inventory included 816 mature trees, of which the federal contract specifically identified 140 as high-value carbon assets due to age and species. Of the 30 trees that were cut, 23 were on that list. I asked him what that meant in dollars. He pulled up a spreadsheet on his tablet. 23 protected high-value assets is approximately $147,000 in unrecoverable contract value, plus an automatic clawback penalty of 50% for unilateral removal, plus a stewardship breach surcharge, plus the cost of replacement plantings to restore inventory baseline. He looked at me. You are looking at federal damages of approximately $230,000 on the carbon contract alone. That is, before we even discuss state heritage damages or Endangered Species Act exposure. I sat with that for a long minute. Then he said the part that mattered most. Mr. Brannigan, the people who cut these trees did so without notifying the federal contracting officer, without notifying the state DNR, and without notifying the tribal fisheries office that co-manages the spawning channel. Under the Federal Lacey Act, transporting timber across county lines that was harvested in violation of a state law is a separate federal offense. The crew that did this drove the logs to a sawmill in Snohomish County. That's a Lacey Act exposure for whoever ordered the cut. Federal misdemeanor minimum. Felony if intent can be proved. He closed his tablet. And Mr. Brannigan, for what it's worth, the contracting officer for your file is going to want to be in the room when this case goes public. The federal government does not take well to people who treat carbon contracts as personal landscaping budgets. Linnea was making notes furiously the entire time. When Whitaker stood to leave, she walked him to his vehicle. They spoke quietly by his driver's side door for another 10 minutes. When she came back to the porch, she had a different expression on her face. The careful lawyer expression had been replaced by something quieter. Something like resolve. Tate, she said, we are going to assemble the full case quietly over the next 10 days. I am going to call the Swinomish Tribal Fisheries Office tonight. I am going to call EPA Region 10 tomorrow. I am going to call the U.S. Forest Service Office of General Counsel on Thursday. And then I am going to wait until Marlene Voss does one more thing on her own, because she will. And when she does, we file all of it on the same morning. I asked her how she could be so sure. She smiled the small smile of a person who has watched a particular kind of human behavior for too many years. Tate, women like Marlene cannot stop. She believes she is winning. She has paid lawyers, planted a story in the local paper, filed a DNR complaint, and she still does not have her settlement. The version of herself she shows to her HOA board cannot accept a quiet outcome. She has to find a way to dominate the situation publicly. Give her 2 weeks. She will do something visible enough to put her behind a federal podium with handcuffs in her future. I asked her how she could be so confident. She closed her notebook. Because I have seen this exact pattern 11 times in my career, she said. It always ends the same way. Pride does the prosecution's work for them. The next 10 days were the quietest of my life since my mother's funeral. Linnea worked her phones. The Swinomish Tribal Fisheries Office accepted the co-claimant role on a Thursday afternoon, after their tribal attorney reviewed Yvette Polson's photographs of the destroyed riparian buffer. Their tribal counsel was a woman who had spent 15 years at the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission. She was, in Linnea's words, the last lawyer in the Pacific Northwest you ever want on the other side of a courtroom. EPA. Region 10 opened a file on the herbicide question. Linnea's hunch. Pending evidence. The U.S. Forest Service Office of General Counsel assigned a contracting officer to the carbon credit breach. The Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife assigned an enforcement officer to the riparian buffer destruction. The State Department of Natural Resources assigned a supervisor to the timber trespass referral. 5 separate state and federal agencies were quietly building parallel files on a woman who still believed she had won. Meanwhile, I worked on what mattered. Travis and I drove down to a goat rescue operation outside Olympia called Maple Grove Refuge. Their director, an old Quaker farmer named Augustus Holland, walked us through 43 goats that needed homes. Travis fell in love with a one-eyed Nubian doe named Penelope and a 3-legged pygmy buck named Captain. Augustus laughed when Travis named off the goats by personality after 20 minutes of meeting them. We came home with 8 rescue goats in a borrowed trailer. We named the operation the Helen Brannigan Caprine Refuge. I filed the 501c3 paperwork on a Wednesday morning. By Friday, I had registered with the American Goat Society and the Washington State Department of Agriculture as an animal-assisted therapy facility for individuals with developmental disabilities. Travis was the official greeter. He wrote name cards for every goat. He hand-fed Captain a carrot every morning at 6. I started drafting the replanting plan. 280 native saplings, Douglas fir, western red cedar, bigleaf maple, vine maple, Pacific yew, salmonberry, red osier dogwood. Riparian zone appropriate species selected to restore the spawning channel buffer faster than Marlene's crew had destroyed it. The Skagit County Conservation District agreed to provide 70% of the saplings at no cost. The Swinomish tribe agreed to contribute ceremonial cedar saplings from a tribal nursery. Volunteers from the local Audubon chapter signed up to help with the planting day. Rosalind drove up on a Friday to install acoustic recording equipment along the property line. The county prosecutor, yes, the same office that had tried to bury the case, had quietly assigned a senior environmental crimes attorney named Olive Banks to take over after the federal interest landed. Olive needed evidence of any further encroachment, and trail cameras alone weren't enough. The acoustic recorder caught everything within 400 feet of the property line. Trucks, voices, chainsaws, a barn owl, 3 nights running. I installed 7 additional trail cameras along the property line, in places no one would notice, behind a stump, inside a hollowed cedar, tucked into a coil of barbed wire, mounted high on the back of an old tool shed. Each one had cellular uplink and time-stamped night vision. Each one fed to a private server Linnea's office monitored. Hugh Pelham, the foreman of Western Slope Tree, came to my house on a Saturday morning. He was 41 years old, sober for 6 weeks, and looked like he had not slept since the cutting. He had heard from a friend at the courthouse that the case was going federal. He wanted to talk. I made him coffee. I let him talk for 45 minutes. He told me Marlene had paid him $14,000 in cash from a brown envelope in the cab of her Range Rover. He told me she had shown him a forged easement document with what she claimed was a county zoning seal. He told me she had specifically instructed his crew to take the cedars first because they blocked the morning light off her bay window. He told me he had a bad feeling the entire morning. He told me he had called his ex-wife from the truck before the first cut and told her, "I am about to do something that is going to ruin me." I asked him if he would say all of that on a recorded statement to Linnea Halverson. He did, the next morning. 2 hours of recorded testimony with a notary present. By the end of the second week, the file was 8 inches thick. The replanting plan was approved. The goat sanctuary had 11 goats, 2 volunteer caretakers, and a waiting list of 3 families with kids on the autism spectrum who wanted to visit. We were ready. We just needed Marlene to do the thing Linnea had said she would do. She did, the next Tuesday. Tuesday morning, Marlene Voss filed a civil suit against me in Skagit County Superior Court. The suit alleged intentional creation of nuisance, interference with quiet enjoyment of premises, and violation of view corridor easement. It demanded $150,000 in damages, plus an injunction requiring me to remove all goats from the property within 30 days. The view corridor easement she cited was the same fictional document she had been claiming for 2 years. She also filed, simultaneously, a complaint with the Skagit County Health Department alleging that the goats were producing noxious odors and potentially zoonotic disease vectors. 4 of her HOA neighbors signed affidavits supporting the complaint. The health department sent an inspector on Thursday. Her name was Marvella Doyle, a 30-year veteran. She spent 40 minutes on the property, watched Travis hand-feed Captain a carrot, reviewed every goat's veterinary records, and signed a clean compliance form. "Mr. Brannigan," she said as she handed me my copy, "your operation is the cleanest small caprine facility I have inspected this year. Whatever your neighbor is smelling is in her own head." That afternoon, Linnea filed a counterclaim against Marlene for malicious prosecution and tortious interference with a registered nonprofit, attaching the health department clearance, the DNR clearance, and Hugh Pelham's recorded statement. Wednesday evening, Marlene crossed the line. A contractor named Niall Harkness, a poker friend of Reginald Voss, filed a mechanics lien against my farm for unpaid landscaping services. The lien claimed I had hired him in March to clear downed timber and refused to pay $4,800. The downed timber he claimed to have cleared was, of course, the timber Marlene's crew had cut. I had never met him. Linnea had the lien withdrawn within 24 hours. By Friday, Olive Banks had opened a fraud investigation against both Niall Harkness and Reginald Voss for filing falsified documents with the county recorder. I should have been angry. I wasn't. Every move Marlene made was another exhibit in her own prosecution. Linnea called me Friday night. Her voice was tight. "Tate, the trail cameras flagged something at 4:50 this morning. I need you and Travis to come to my office tomorrow. I have not opened the footage yet. I want all of us to watch it together with Olive Banks." I sat on the porch with the phone in my hand for a long time. The night was cold. The goats were quiet in the lower pasture. The stars were sharper than they had been in years because there were no fir crowns to filter them. The next morning we drove to Linnea's office. Olive Banks was already there. So was an EPA Region 10 special agent named Kit Donegan and a representative from the Swinomish Tribal Fisheries Office. Linnea opened her laptop and the trail camera footage came up in night vision green. A white pickup truck pulled up to the property line at 4:52 a.m. Two men got out, ball caps pulled low, each carrying a 5-gallon container with a hand pump sprayer. They walked the full 200-foot length of the spawning channel buffer and sprayed the contents directly into the water and onto the saplings I had planted 3 weeks earlier. They worked for 14 minutes. Then they got back into the truck and drove away. The license plate was visible for 3 frames. Kit Donegan paused the footage. He looked at me, then at Linnea, then at Olive. "That plate is registered to a vehicle owned by Reginald Voss," he said quietly. "That substance, based on application pattern, is almost certainly a glyphosate concentrate. Water samples will confirm. If confirmed, that is a Felony Clean Water Act violation, a Felony Endangered Species Act take, and an attempt to destroy federal evidence in an active federal investigation." He closed the laptop. "Mr. Brannigan," he said, "we have her." The water samples came back positive on Tuesday. Glyphosate concentrate at 28 times the residential application rate, mixed with a non-ionic surfactant designed to penetrate plant tissue, the kind of cocktail you mix when you intend to kill everything within reach. Olive Banks scheduled the public hearing for the following Friday at the Skagit County Commissioner's Office in Mount Vernon. The hearing would consolidate the timber trespass, the federal carbon credit breach, the riparian buffer violation, and the Clean Water Act referral. Local press had picked up the story after a tribal newsletter mentioned the federal investigation. By Wednesday, 3 regional papers had reporters assigned. By Thursday, 2 Seattle TV stations had requested camera permits. Marlene called me Thursday afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. She left a 46-second message, voice tight, claiming a misunderstanding, offering to sit down personally and find a private resolution before things go too far. I forwarded the voicemail to Linnea, unedited. Linnea added it to the file as Exhibit 47. Travis spent Thursday afternoon braiding leftover baling twine into a small bracelet for Marvella Doyle, the health department inspector. He had taken a quiet liking to her after the inspection. He wrote her name on a folded piece of cardstock and asked if I would mail it. I mailed it that evening. Friday morning came clear and cold, a skim of frost on the goat pen roof. Travis had laid out his clothes the night before, khaki pants, a green flannel shirt, the small carved goat in his front pocket where he could reach it. I made oatmeal. I put on a charcoal blazer my mother had bought me for her 60th birthday. I shaved. I took a long look at the empty ridge through the kitchen window. At 7:30, Linnea called. Her voice was steady. "Tate, Olive just confirmed the federal contracting officer is flying in from Portland. The U.S. Forest Service legal counsel is sending a representative. The EPA agent will be in the room. The Swinomish tribe is sending 2 attorneys and a fisheries scientist. The chair of the county commissioners is expecting a full evidentiary presentation. Are you ready to speak?" I told her I was. "You don't have to. I can deliver the entire case." "I know," I said, "but Travis is coming with me. He needs to see his brother stand up in a room and tell the truth. It will be the most important thing I do for him this year." There was a small pause on the other end. "Then we will make sure you have the floor at the end," Linnea said. "After the agencies, after the tribal council. The last word is yours." I hung up. I drove the long way to Mount Vernon, past the goat pen where Captain limped over and bleated at us, past the line of saplings I had planted, past the property line where the trail cameras still watched, past the gates of Heron Bluff Estates, where the security guard waved at our truck like it was any other Friday. Travis sat in the passenger seat with his hand in his pocket where the wooden goat lived. He didn't say much. He hummed under his breath the way he hummed when he was nervous but not afraid. We pulled into the courthouse parking lot at 9:15. The local press had set up cameras on the front steps. A Channel 5 reporter was already going live. Linnea met us at the front door with Olive Banks and Kit Donegan. Behind them was Rosalind Krause carrying a small wooden box of stump cores. Behind her was the Swinomish Tribal Council and a fisheries scientist holding a glass jar of water samples. I shook every hand. I introduced Travis to each one. He looked each person in the eye and said his name slowly and clearly. He did not let go of the wooden goat in his pocket. We walked into the hearing room together at 9:45. Marlene was already seated at the front table on the left side. She wore a navy suit and a strand of pearls. Reginald sat one row behind her in a charcoal jacket. Their attorney, a thin man from a Seattle firm, sat between them with a leather portfolio and a tight expression. Marlene looked up when we walked in. Her face did not change. I think she still believed she could win. I sat down next to Travis in the second row of the right side gallery. Linnea sat at the front table on our side. Olive sat next to Linnea. Behind us, the press filed into the back rows. The chair of the commissioners gavelled the hearing to order at 10 o'clock sharp. The first witness was Yvette Polson from the DNR. She walked the commission through her riparian buffer report. The second witness was Rosalind Krause, with her box of stump cores. The third witness was Kit Donegan. Donegan walked the commission through the trail camera footage, frame by frame. The two figures in ball caps, the 5-gallon containers, the deliberate spraying along 200 feet of spawning channel buffer, the vehicle plate visible in 3 frames, the federal database match on the registered owner, the water sample lab results. The room watched in silence. When the footage ended, Donegan turned to face the commissioners. "I am here in my capacity as a special agent for EPA Region 10, he said. "Based on the evidence presented today, I am formally referring this matter to the United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of Washington. The federal charges under consideration include felony violation of the Clean Water Act, felony violation of the Endangered Species Act, conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation, and Lacey Act trafficking. I am also serving notice today that the U.S. Forest Service Office of General Counsel is filing a separate civil action for breach of the federal carbon credit contract attached to the Brannigan property." He turned and walked across the room. He stopped in front of Marlene Voss. "Mrs. Voss, Mr. Voss, you are not under arrest at this time. You are formally on notice that you are subjects of an active federal criminal investigation. Anything you say from this point forward may be used against you. I would advise you to retain federal criminal counsel before the close of business today." He handed each of them a manila envelope. Marlene's face went the color of paste. Reginald did not move at all. Their attorney leaned over and whispered something. Marlene tried to stand. The attorney put a hand on her arm. The Swinomish Tribal Council stood next. She introduced herself. She introduced the Treaty of Point Elliott of 1855. She walked the commission through the tribal co-management interest in the spawning channel that ran through the Brannigan property. She presented the water sample results in the context of the steelhead run that had been documented in that channel for 46 consecutive years. She asked the commissioners to formally support the tribal civil action, joining the federal case. The vote was unanimous and immediate, 5-0. Olive Banks stood third. She presented the state criminal case, heritage tree triple damages under RCW 64.12.030, felony timber trespass, conspiracy to falsify a county recorder filing, witness tampering related to the appraiser, Bryce Tinney. She asked for and received a temporary restraining order against Marlene and Reginald Voss, prohibiting any further contact with my property, my goats, or any of my saplings. The commissioner signed the order from the bench. Then Linnea Halverson stood. She introduced me. She introduced Travis. She walked us up to the speaking podium. I helped Travis up the 2 steps. He stood beside me, his hand in his pocket where the wooden goat was. He looked out at the room. He looked at the press in the back rows. He looked at Marlene Voss 4 feet away, who would not look at him. I tapped the microphone twice. "My name is Tate Brannigan," I said. "My mother's name was Helen Brannigan. She bought 28 acres on the south end of Lake Kavanaugh in 1961. The land had been clear-cut. There was nothing on it but stumps and bad drainage. She planted 800 Douglas fir saplings between 1962 and 1965, mostly with a borrowed shovel and her own 2 hands. I paused. 60 years later, the trees she planted were standing 130 feet tall. They were registered as carbon assets with the federal government. 12 of them were registered as heritage trees with this county. They were the buffer that protected a salmon spawning channel that the Swinomish tribe has been counting on for 46 years. I put my hand on Travis's shoulder. They were cut down at the order of the woman sitting 4 feet to my left. She paid a tree crew $14,000 in cash. She showed them a forged easement document. She did this because she did not like the way my mother's trees blocked her view of a lake that nobody owns. I let that sit. You cut down 30 trees for a lake view, Mrs. Voss. We are going to replace them with 300. We are going to put goats among them. We are going to name the place after my mother. And you are going to spend the next 20 years paying for it. The room did not breathe. Travis looked up at me. Tate, he said softly, can I say something? I nodded. I lifted him toward the microphone. He spoke into it carefully. The trees were our friends, he said. I will plant new friends. They will be your friends too if you ever want to come visit. The press did not move for almost 10 seconds. Then someone in the back row started clapping. Then everyone did. Marlene Voss put her face in her hands. I led Travis back to our seats. The federal investigation moved fast. 6 weeks after the hearing, Marlene and Reginald Voss were indicted on a combined 12-count federal indictment. 2 Felony Clean Water Act counts, 2 Endangered Species Act counts, 1 Lacey Act count, 3 counts of conspiracy, 1 count of obstruction, 3 counts of mail and wire fraud related to the forged easement and the falsified mechanic's lien. Reginald lost his seat on the county zoning board the same week. He resigned from his country club 2 days later. Plea negotiations stretched 8 months. Marlene was sentenced to 14 months of federal supervision, 2,000 court-ordered conservation hours, and $642,000 in restitution. Reginald served 5 months at the federal facility in Sheridan, Oregon. They sold the lakefront house at a 40% loss and moved to a condominium in Spokane. The Heron Bluff HOA removed Marlene from the presidency by a vote of 44-3. The new president was a kindergarten teacher named Patty Eldridge, who had voted against every one of Marlene's view corridor proposals for 9 years. The Helen Brannigan Caprine Refuge opened to the public on a Saturday morning in June. We had 11 goats, 2 volunteer caretakers, and a 47-person waiting list of families requesting therapy visits. We had 314 native saplings in the ground along the Salmon Channel. The Skagit County Conservation District planted 60 more on a community workday. The Swinomish tribe contributed 14 ceremonial cedar saplings raised in their tribal nursery, each one tagged with a hand-carved cedar plaque honoring my mother's stewardship. Travis was the official tour guide. He wore a name tag he had made himself. He led every visitor to Captain first, because Captain was his favorite, and Captain liked to be scratched behind the right ear. The Heritage Tree Program expanded its registration to 12 neighboring properties after our case became public. 2 of them were small farms that Marlene had been pressuring for years. The Skagit Beacon printed a full-page apology for its earlier coverage. The apology ran on page 3 with a photograph of Travis hugging Captain. I rebuilt my mother's old tool shed that summer. Same cedar siding, same dimensions, same window facing the empty ridge that was filling back in with 2-foot saplings. I framed Travis's drawing of the stump with the small bird sitting on it, the one labeled Friend. I hung it inside the shed door so I would see it every morning. The salmon came back to the spawning channel that fall, 43 steelhead in the first 2 weeks. The Swinomish fisheries scientist drove out to count them. She brought Travis a small carved cedar fish for his pocket. He keeps it next to the wooden goat. Some evenings I sit on the porch with him after the chores are done and the goats are quiet. The stars are still sharp through the gap in the ridge, but they will not be sharp forever because the saplings are growing fast. In 10 years, they will be 15 feet tall. In 20, they will be over 30. In 60, when nobody alive remembers any of this, they will be the same height my mother's trees were the day Marlene Voss decided she wanted a better view. Travis asked me last week whether the trees Mom planted are still alive somewhere. I told him they are. I told him every tree we plant carries the memory forward. I told him that's what trees do. They remember things humans forget. He thought about that for a while. Then he nodded slowly and said, "Then I want to plant a lot of memories." I hugged him for a long time.
There's something about Ted Brannan's story that doesn't let go of me. It isn't the federal damages. It isn't even Travis stepping to the microphone. It's the patience. 60 years of trees planted by a woman with borrowed shovel turned out to be more powerful than zoning board, an HOA president, and a Seattle law firm combined. Helen Brannan never wrote a brief. She just put trees in the ground, and when somebody finally tried to erase what she had built, the law was already on her side, because Tate had taken 30 years of agricultural knowledge and quietly written everything down. That's the lesson. Loud people break things, quiet people record things. When the two collide, the quiet ones almost always win. The 47 families with kids on the autism spectrum who visit the Gold Sanctuary every month, they are the real result of Marilyn Vaught's problem. If you have had a neighbor confuse a clipboard for a court order, drop your story in the comments. Hit subscribe, and next week, the HOA that tried to find a Marine veteran for flying his Bronze Stars ribbon at half-staff, he didn't argue. He showed up at the next board meeting with 60 Marines.